In this video, I'm going to explain the nihilism family tree, which contains every major philosophical position on the meaning of life, so that you can know where you stand. Let's get into this. And so we start at the top with the most pivotal question of all. Is meaning objectively real? If you answer this question yes, then you are unsurprisingly a realist. Now, I want to make it clear off the bat that I do not agree with this position, but I've noticed that a lot of people in my camp tend to make the mistake of assuming that realism is inherently absurd or nonsensical as a position. And I think that this mistake usually comes from the position of not understanding what realism would actually mean if it were true, so let me explain it here. Let's compare with something we can all agree is objectively real. Say, the mouse on your desk right now. When you look at a mouse, you experience it subjectively, and that's because what it means to have a perception is for a visual experience of that thing to exist within your consciousness. And by definition, all things within human consciousness are subjective. But of course, that doesn't mean that the mouse itself is subjective, because as well as your experience of the mouse, there is also a fact of its existence in the world. Because the object of the mouse has objective facts about it. Its chemical composition, its mass, its location in the world. And so what it means to say that a mouse is objective is to say that while we do experience it subjectively, there is also some object out there in the world, and that our experience is in a relationship of perception to that object. And yes, I appreciate that I have just said something extremely obvious in obtusely philosophical language, but you'll see why I've done this when I point out that meaning can have that exact same relationship. Yes, everybody agrees that our feelings of meaning are subjective, but it could be the case that there is some object of meaning out there in the universe, and that whenever we feel meaningful, all we're doing is perceiving that object. And therefore, unless you want to commit yourself to the position that everything is subjective, you have to admit that realism is at least possible as a philosophy. Having said that, just because a philosophy can make sense doesn't mean it's true, as we're going to need some evidence. And the most common way to argue for realism is with God. Because of course, if God was real and had imbued every aspect of his creation with his will, then that would be the objective standard we could measure against to determine whether or not something was meaningful. But there's just one small problem with this. Most people don't believe in a God. And so what if we go back to the first question and answer it differently? What if we deny the existence of objective meaning? Well, that, my friends, would take us to the nihilism family. The nihil in nihilism has the same usage as in football. It means nil or zero. Therefore, nihilism literally translates to nothingism, the belief that when it comes to meaning, there is none. And so if we believe that there is no objective meaning, the next question we can ask is whether or not there can be any subjective meaning. In the face of a universe that contains no purpose, can we create some ourselves? If you believe the answer to this question is yes, that makes you an existentialist. Existentialism includes philosophers like Sartre and Nietzsche, people who spent their whole lives trying to create a meaning for man to follow. And if it wasn't obvious, existentialism is also the mission of my entire channel, trying to build up new philosophies and communities so that people can experience a real subjective meaning in their life. Of course, there are still those who deny it. Some people believe that you cannot have objective nor subjective meaning in their life. And so this family is what I would call hard nihilism. As hard nihilism goes all the way and states that there can be no meaning whatsoever. Now, some philosophers looked at this fact and didn't think it was a problem. Albert Camus famously believed there was no meaning in the universe, but thought that man could be happy without it. In his book, The Myth of Sisyphus, Camus famously says that one must imagine Sisyphus happy, not because he's found some system of philosophy to justify his life, but because he acknowledges that he doesn't have to. Sisyphus admits how absurd his reality is, and uses that fact to accept his position and learn to be happy without meaning. Now, you may recall that I did make a 40-minute long video called Why Absurdism is Terrible. But I will defend absurdism. I think that its strongest variety is that found within traditional Buddhism, because Buddhism states that desire is the root of all suffering. When you desperately want something but can't have it, that's the thing that can cause you pain. And so Buddhists believe that the goal in life should be to let go of these desires to experience the ultimate happiness. So if we believe that meaning isn't real, and believe the Buddhists that our desire for meaning is the thing that's causing us suffering, then surely the answer should be to let go of these desires, acknowledge that meaning isn't real, know that the universe is absurd, and just be okay with that. But of course, there are still those who think that even this isn't possible. Those who believe that objective meaning isn't real, subjective meaning isn't real, and that that's a problem. Let me introduce the pessimists. Pessimism is the depressing philosophy which states that humans require meaning. There is no meaning, therefore we're fucked. And so here we have the four most common positions: theism, existentialism, absurdism, and pessimism. But there are, of course, a few more obscure beliefs, and so let's fill in the graph with a few more nuances. At the beginning, I said that realism is usually propped up by a belief in God. However, there are a few people who identify as atheists while still believing that meaning is objective. And the wildest and most interesting of these attempts comes from a philosopher called Philip Goff. Goff's argument comes in two steps. He starts off with a variation of the ontological argument for God. This argument states that the probability of the universe being exactly the way it was is 1 to a trillion. If gravity had been 0.1% stronger, the entire universe would have collapsed in on itself. Had gravity been 0.1% weaker, the universe would have flown out and never been connected. Therefore, it's fair to state that the universe just so happening to have the exact conditions possible for sustaining life is a massive coincidence. And so if you saw somebody playing blackjack and watched them win a trillion hands in a row, you would have to conclude that they were somehow cheating, because it would be impossible to accept that something that cosmically unlikely could have actually happened by chance. And while most people use this argument to prove God's existence, this is where part 2 of his argument comes in. You see, Goff also believes in the atheist argument from evil. This argument states that premise 1, an all-loving, all-powerful God would never create a universe with suffering in it. Premise 2, there is suffering in the universe. Conclusion, there cannot be an all-powerful, all-loving God. So Goff believes that some force made the universe the way it is, with the goal of creating a purpose for us. But he believes that that force isn't God, it's something else. I won't go any deeper and explain how he thinks that works, but just note that it is possible to be a realist without believing in God, and that there are a bunch of crazy arguments for these positions. Another nuance I'd like to fill in on the graph is that there's actually two different kinds of pessimism. This was argued by a philosopher called Bernard Regenster. The first kind of pessimism he calls despair. This is when you desperately want the universe to have meaning, notice that it contains none, and thus start hating the universe, feeling resentment for the thing that you're being denied. But the second kind is what he calls disorientation. This kind of pessimism states that in order to believe that a lack of meaning in the universe is bad, you would have to have some kind of system of values telling you it's bad. But of course, this belief is rejecting the existence of such an objective system. And so someone experiencing disorientation wouldn't even be able to hate the universe. They would simply be unable to get out of bed in the morning, as without any kind of value telling them that that would be better than the alternative, they would have no ability to act. They would be philosophically paralyzed. And of course, these two kinds of pessimism are mutually exclusive, as one states that you should hate the universe, while the other states that you shouldn't have any opinion. But luckily, I don't think this is something we actually have to deal with, as the final nuance I want to color in is that there are actually two different kinds of existentialism. And I haven't found any language to describe this difference, and so I'm going to coin the terms liberal and conservative existentialism. A liberal existentialist is someone who might say there is no objective meaning in life, so we can make meaning whatever we want. If somebody states that the meaning of their life is counting every blade of grass in the world or being a serial killer, then we have no way to judge them. All kinds of meaning in life are equal, as there's no objective standard to judge them against. Whereas a conservative existentialist will point out that the human brain has requirements. The same way that you can't put just anything into your mouth and expect it to be nutritious, you can't put just any stimulus into your brain and expect your life to be meaningful. People in this camp believe that because the human mind is structured in a certain way, the meaning of our lives also has to be constructed in a certain way, and that closely studying this and sticking to certain traditions is the way to achieve it. However, it should be noted that I have not marked these down as two entirely distinct positions, but as two ends of a spectrum, as I would probably put myself somewhere in the middle of this spectrum. I do believe that individuals should be free to build whatever meaning that they want and that can be valid, but also that there has to be some kind of consistency and structure to it, otherwise you're wasting your time. And so there we have it. Every position it's possible to have on the meaning of life. Let me know in the comments where you lie on this graph, and if you want to take the conversation further, make sure to join my Discord, linked in the description.